Well, the recent election and the changes coming in Washington have people worldwide wondering about how it all impacts the international economy. American International College professor of economics John Rogers spoke with Connecting Point correspondent Carolyn McGrath to give us his read on the world economy and what the future may hold.
Well, I think the early indications are actually pretty positive. The stock market, which tends to look ahead, is looking at economic growth picking up. It's looking at these perhaps big infrastructure projects, which could create a lot of jobs and create a lot of business opportunities, bring in a lot of capital investment, maybe get the economic growth rate up from the rather sluggish rate that it's been at for the last few years. Even though we're in a recovery, it's not dynamic, so maybe bring that up from 2% up to 3%. He's talking about 3.5 to 4. I think that's a stretch, but certainly if we could sustain 3%, that would be a very good thing.
Do you think it's an aggressive goal to have 3.5% to 4?
Well, you got to remember that we are basically at full employment, and we also have a problem.
Job participation rate, isn't that the concern on that?
Well, those are people who don't want to look for work. Now, maybe you could bring some of those people out,
right.
But he's also talking about cracking down on immigration and maybe even deporting a lot of people. So I think you're going to run into some blocks in the labor supply. And we already have a fairly significant government deficit, and a big national debt. And if you really want to do some of these things, you need to invest. And so that's going to create more government spending, which hopefully would be recuperated with greater revenues because of higher economic growth, but then he's talking about cutting taxes. So there are a lot of pieces that don't entirely fit together. I mean, I think the plan is probably a good one, but there are pieces that need to be balanced.
There's some things that concern you, including relationships with other countries, Mexico and China.
That's my main concern with President-elect Trump. I think a lot of his ideas about getting the economy moving, reforming the tax code, investing in infrastructure, I think those are spot on, if you like. But I'm really concerned about his attitude toward foreign trade for several reasons. First of all, he seems to have it out for a couple of countries, Mexico and China in particular. And I just think Mexico is a country that's on our border. I think it's important for the United States that Mexico do well, that it continue to progress economically, because if it doesn't, we just have all kinds of problems that could get much worse. And I think with China, it is the second largest economy in the world, and it's a very important trading partner. Again, there's some imbalance in the trade, but I think that's probably just a reflection of the historical development. They're at an earlier stage of development than we are. So we're going to suck in more imports and they push out more exports. But I think it's a very important relationship and you don't want it to fall apart.
So let's talk about Carrier. That was one of the, I guess, the deals that he got involved in recently. And about 800 jobs are now staying in the U.S. And a lot of people, there was a new poll out that said, a lot of people really liked that he got involved and his favorability went up. Was that something?
Well, I think he's a good politician, and he's, let's face it, in the positive sense, a good showman. I mean, he knows how to play the various incidents and the events in a very positive way. And I think it's a question also maybe a little bit of leadership style. I think Americans like to see their president fighting for them. And President Obama, notwithstanding his many strong points, never really came across that way. He's aloof, he's cool. Trump's a fighter, and people are responding to that.
And on the flip side, was it just corporate welfare?
Well, I wouldn't call it corporate welfare, but I would call it potentially rather bad economics. The major multinational companies that are really the backbone of our economy, such as United Technologies, work off of global platforms. So they look at the world and they figure out where to produce, where to sell, and it's a very sophisticated process. Think of something like an iPhone. I mean, it's designed in California, but the actual production is done in all kinds of subcontracting, supply chain relationships throughout Asia, or Nike shoes. So these complex platforms don't lend themselves very well to this sort of one-off kind of decision-making.
His message of reducing taxes, reducing regulations for businesses certainly resonated, but in particular when you're talking about manufacturing jobs, he's talked about bringing back, just bringing back jobs to the U.S. and keeping jobs in the U.S. Obviously, that resonated with people. Certainly if you look at the central part of our country and all of those red states, it resonated big time with them. Do you think he can deliver on that?
Well, I think he can maybe help, and particularly if the economy picks up and if there is infrastructure investment, that will help everybody, including these blue-collar workers and some of the manufacturing companies that will supply the pipes and the equipment that go into these infrastructure projects. So yes, I think it'll be positive, but the idea of saying we're going to make iPhones in the United States is not going to happen.
And how did you feel about the situation with Boeing, his reaction to him canceling the Defense Department's contract with Boeing to build a new Air Force One for future presidents? He said it was costs were out of control.
Yeah, that one, I be honest with you, I really didn't understand, because if you look at it, what is Boeing doing? First of all, the numbers were wrong. I think he said $4 billion, but it's actually just a little over $3 billion. Secondly, it's a 747. That's a plane that they really aren't even making anymore. So Boeing is keeping that in production on behalf of the U.S. government.
On the economy front, what can people expect in 2017?
Well, I think the view that I would have, and it's shared, I think, fairly broadly, is in the short term, this is going to be pretty positive, because you're going to have some real changes on the investment front. You're going to have some more stimulus, which we need, less reliance on monetary policy. Interest rates may go up a little bit, but probably not enormously, simply because of the worldwide situation. You're going to have a strong dollar, and you're going to have some lightening up of regulation, which could be huge. I mean, I think that's one area where we could really get a lot of benefit. So all of those things together could be positive. My concern is if he's really serious about doing some of these international trade maneuvers, I think that could be quite dangerous in the long run. It'll take a while for that to play out, but I think that could be bad in the long run.
All right, Professor Rogers, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your perspective on this.
Yeah, thank you.